with balancing to make sure all the records were there, and then a variable by variable comparison between the two systems. And quite honestly, the client did significant testing. We wrote scripts, and they went through all their scripts to test that data as well. What you may see in some instances, since the data structures are different in World and Oasis, is what Oasis thought was a two-story, we did not think was a two-story in terms of the way we value. So if there are other specific instances of where we feel like the data might not have been converted correctly, I would love to see them, but because we took real pains to get that right.
Okay. Discuss why there are neighborhoods that have anomalies which require the neighborhoods to be reviewed in their entirety. For example, Bellwood, and I think this was an early one where council had talked about the fact that it had been zoned commercial and there were non-conforming residential uses. So that has been discussed. Was there anything additional that you all wanted to answer? Would you consider that an anomaly, or how would you characterize that? I don't know, Mr. Henderson or whoever.
I would say that I think those are in reference to the properties that were originally, dwellings that were zoned residential and moved to a commercial neighborhood, which carried a commercial land rate where the location factor was left off, or left blank, I should say, which defaulted to the highest rate for that neighborhood. So all those properties, all those residential dwellings that were in commercial neighborhoods have all been dealt with. We've either made a reduction through the appeal process, or we've already had the administrative correction done in the system, and we're just awaiting approval by the board to send out a letter of valuation difference to the property owner. We had one, I think it was yesterday or the day before yesterday, that John had brought to my, I think it was yesterday, brought to my attention at the board meeting. And it was similar, but it was just one additional property. So that all those have been dealt with already.
All right, we have Mayor Pro Tem has a question about that.
Not necessarily that, but the information about the one-story and the two-story house. When you all ran your systems, they would have run parallel, right? The old system versus the new system.
Right.
Would it not have kicked out those individual parcels that said one thing on the new system and something else on the old system?
Right, and I heard that question earlier, and just to comment on that, when we were in the data collection the first 6 months of the project when I arrived, about the first 4 to 6 months, there was some discussion in regards to story heights. We went kind of back and forth with the assessor's office in regards to naming those type of properties. That the county had a way of listing those properties in Oasis that generally we made a consensus on, that we were going to change the way that those were listed in IAS. In other words, there was a lot of situations where the county might have had a 1.5-story house that they called a 2-story. They either called it a 1-story or a 2-story. So a decision was made based on square footage of the second floor as to whether or not to call it a 1 or 1.5 or a 2-story, or maybe even a 1-story with an attic. So it wasn't necessarily that the data that came over was converted differently or not the same as what Oasis was. It was in the way that the property was listed in the new system. The same type of house, same type of data. Data was clean. Excuse me. It was the interpretation of how that was going to be listed going forward. We had some debate on that, but we made that decision.
I'd be interested to see if Councilor Thomas would give you the addresses of the two examples that she gave.
Yeah, when you get into specifics, I'd have to have a parcel number to look at it and see what's going on.
Okay. Not publicly, but you know.
Right.
I think I can do it.
Okay.
Okay. All right, good. And then let's see. Is there any type of discernible pattern in the properties whose values have been reduced through the appeals process? And I don't know if that's for John or who might, but those 32% of the appeals that, or maybe it's 55% of those that have been reviewed have been reduced. What are you seeing? Is there a commonality?
Remember, I see the complex ones. So the ones that come to me, that's the bottom of that number, 9.5%. It may be up to now 374 designated for my review. The commonalities, if you will, of properties that were reduced in this review, we've discussed. A lot of them are Upatoy is one area that the land value just seemed to be higher than what the sales that I found supported. We've talked about Bellwood, and Steve just talked about that, the commercial rates applied to properties that had a house on it. So those patterns have been gathered, and we talked about that early on. It's the appeal process that points to the problem areas. And the appeals have pointed those areas out to us, and so we've made those adjustments. They're waiting either to be applied to a specific property that's been appealed, or, as we've said many times, we'll handle that administratively if there is no appeal. So those are the only patterns that I've seen.
Okay. Councilor Garrett has stated that number 5 has been answered. It was answered at the previous meeting. So number 6, was there any consideration of running the 2017 values maybe under both the OASIS system and the IS system to compare the results? And ma'am, I think you've already answered that. Do you want to just, in direct response to the question, did you run the values for 2017 under both the OASIS system and the IAS world system and compare the results?
We did not. And again, a question of capability or functionality on the old OASIS side.
Okay, and it says, why were you incapable of running the 2017 under the OASIS system?
Well, it's, again, OASIS is older technology, not touched or upgraded since Y2K. An example we talked about was all those neighborhoods, all those neighborhoods that Steve was referring to. Simply a function of the need to create all those neighborhoods in OASIS to get the land valuation approach that was needed. So the characteristics, you could not have expected OASIS to essentially keep up with the technology in IS world with data comparison.
Okay. The next question is almost similar, but I'm going to go ahead and ask it in case there's a different intent. Why were we incapable of running the entire revaluation under the OASIS system? Or did we do that?
Well, I think it's just essentially a corollary of the first response. You could attempt to certainly do a revaluation in that old legacy system, but it's older, it's extraordinarily labor intensive, a lot of manual effort is required, so it's not very practical.
Okay. What comparative analysis took place of the 2017 results?
Maybe I could speak to that. As we discussed already, there were sales ratio studies prepared per the contract and per IAAO standards for all neighborhoods within the jurisdiction for the whole county.
Okay. And did someone review the comparison report to determine if problems existed?
Yes.
Okay. Were any issues discovered when reviewing the comparison report? I guess that's the same. If there were problems, there were issues.
Right. That would have been reconciled during, final reconciliation or final review. So yes.
Thank you. Could the tax assessor's office or Tyler Technologies have inputted the revaluation information in both the OASIS system and the IAS world system so that comparative analysis had already been run? I'm going to declare that to be asked and answered. How can we place a value on property that represents its highest and best use if the property is not actually or visibly inspected? And if you want to just summarize, I think we talked about that a bit.
Yeah, we discussed the methodology of how we went about reviewing each of the parcel's characteristics. And that's a internationally and across the U.S. recognized standard of how you can go about doing a property review.
Okay, discuss the contract that Tyler has with the city, specifically his performance contract. I'm going to declare that asked and answered too, unless somebody has something additional. Discuss the actual revaluation process. I just think that's been discussed almost ad nauseum. If somebody has an additional follow-up or specific there, they can. Explain about the little white van that drove around, took pictures. I think you did, but...
Sure, that vehicle, there were several of them, that traversed the county, that went to every improved and unimproved parcel in the county to take photographs of primary and secondary structures as they existed at that point in time to be used during the appraisal data verification process. He also did some light checking on particular property characteristics prior to a full characteristic review happening virtually.
Okay. If pictures were taken, why were there so many problems with evaluations?
I think that's a matter of opinion.
All right. Okay, but we did talk about the fact that we have the pictures, so we could always go back and check, I guess. Be prepared to discuss the problems that Tyler's had with other municipalities, and that's what we talked about. Did you want to add something, Mr. Henderson?
I did. Mary actually reminded me of a little bit of detail that exists on this that I wanted to bring up. So the Miami Beach example that was asked about, apparently there's 2 bloggers there in the state of Florida that one may have been tied to one of our competitors that put information out about that particular project. The reality of it is there was some dissatisfaction with the department that wasn't related to the project in terms of public access, is my understanding. It's a very loose understanding. The department that we were actually servicing has actually won a Tyler Excellence Award for providing customer efficiency for their taxpayers and are one of our key references in the state of Florida for that InterGov product. So it seems from the information that I've seen, at least, that that's a happy event. There's maybe some extenuating circumstances about what's been put out on Twitter or on Google related to dissatisfaction maybe from another department accessing that system.
Okay. So. All right. Well, if anybody has anything further on that, we've got Councilor Allen.
Could you send me a contact name with Miami?
I don't have one here, but I'll research that for you. And additionally, I'll make my contact information, Annette Schlomer, who I mentioned, who's on top of these press releases, I'll make that available through Mr. Lomax, who can get it on to all of you.
Okay. All right. Is it possible that wrong information was inputted and we got the wrong results? I think you spoke to that, but to your knowledge, didn't you say you didn't know of any data corruption or inaccurate data? If you did, you fixed it? Okay. All right, that's head nodding. We'll record for the record there. Head nodding in the affirmative. All right, we're skipping 20. As Councilor Garrett said, that's been answered. 21, can a list be prepared that shows non-homestead properties that decreased by more than 10 and 20%? And I think, John, do you have that, or are you getting that?
I don't have
no,
that.
But Councilor Garrett said he wanted that amended to be decreased. Wasn't that correct? It's supposed to be decreased. It was a typo. Yes, John.
What I do have, I don't have the 10, 20, 30, 40 stratification of decreases. I do have stratification of increases beginning at 100%, 100%, 200%, 300%, and so on. Of course, we've covered the 1,000% in detail. You all have that information that I sent you. One of the questions that came about last week, we were talking about the homesteaded properties, and the general assumption, I believe, is, well, the properties that went down, they were all homesteaded. And so that I went in and got the numbers and percentages. Of the 23,086 decreases, 12,493, or 54%, were homesteaded properties. Of the 46,097 properties that increased, there were 16,952, which is right at 37%. So 37% of the properties that increased had a homestead exemption or a freeze in their assessment, and 54% of the decreases had a homestead exemption or a freeze in their property assessment. So that's what I do have, and Councilor Garrett, I will work on getting that further stratification for you.
Okay. All right, number 22, we can skip. That's been previously answered, as Councilor Garrett has notified me. Why was there no communication to council prior to June 13 indicating that there was a problem, that deadlines were not going to be met, think we had an extensive conversation, but to the extent that that's not been answered, I hope that that will be answered in the presentation at the first business meeting. Sort of all your updates to council and where you were and when you first knew about any, quote, problems or need for delay, why, and when council knew about that. Let's see, number 24, were there any reports prepared which indicated large percentages increases, such as those more than 1,000%, and if so, were these properties reviewed?
Yes.
Okay, can you tell us a little bit about that then? What happened? So you ran a report and it showed 1,000 more, and then what'd you do?
Randy and I started running reports. It would have been probably close to the middle of March. We started running them as early as the middle of March. We discussed that with the board yesterday at the board meeting. John and I worked extensively up to and leading to the final delivery of the values to the board on May 22nd. And even after May 22nd, while I was on vacation, John had reached out to me. I had taken a few days off for vacation, and he had reached out to me at home and wanted to know if I could look at the percentage of properties that had decreased. The county took the responsibility of looking at the properties on the increase list. He wanted me to look at some of the apartments that we felt like there was maybe some data that may have been missing, which we corrected. It was a small handful, maybe 6 apartment complexes, I think, in the county. So I actually had my 2 sons with me. As a matter of fact, we were driving down when I got driving home, and I got the email from John, and I didn't have a home office type set up at my home. I went as far as stopping by Best Buy on the way home to get 2 monitors. My sons know a lot more about computer setups than I do. My 21-year-old son is actually in school for IT, and he helped me get all the monitors set up and everything so I could get patched in. Mary helped me get patched in with the VPN connection so I could review these properties, and I actually spent the better part of that evening till about 9 o'clock looking at the decreased list, and then I got up early the next morning around 7 o'clock and worked about 12 hours emailing back and forth with the county reviewing these properties. So it was an exhaustive, extensive review process that was conducted on those. And even after the notices went out, we're continuing to review those and make some adjustments. So.
All right, thank you. Did we conduct a negative test, possibly referring to a comparative analysis? I think that's perhaps a repeat, but would you just answer it with the phrase negative test in there?
Of course, we performed numerous negative tests, which is the entry of invalid data to the system to verify that errors occurred. And we corrected data errors. Yes.
Was there a test plan and test results?
Yes, informal and formal.
Okay. Can Tyler show council the test plan and the test results?
If you wish, certainly.
Okay, let that be one of the things in that referral. Was there an implementation plan?
Yes.
Okay, and is that something that could be documented that we can see?
Yes.
Okay. And can we provide number of appeals for the last 5 to 10 years? I think, John, somebody's asked you for that, haven't they? I don't know if they've asked you for today, but I think today someone asked for that.
I don't know about today. Last time we met,
okay.
Skip asked me if we had that information, and we don't. 2011 was when we started sending notices to every homeowner. Prior to that, not everybody got one. So really, if you think about that, it's not very reflective, in my opinion, when half or less than half got notices of assessment, only when there was a change versus 2011 forward, everybody getting one. The law changed. So I asked my board, you know, how do you want me to focus my energy? Do you want me to continue working these appeals, or you want me to stop and start digging into old data? So I haven't done that, and I was directed to continue on with the appeals. So that's on my list of things to do. The other question along those lines was, what about the last time we had a reval? What was the number of appeals? I don't have that information for you yet. I'm going to try to get it. I don't know if I can get it. I'm going to try. but I don't have either one of those to report to you today.
Okay. Thank you. And then, is there a plan in place for future systematic reevaluation of properties? That, Chester, may be something for you and that the board wants to discuss maybe when this process is over. I think there's a lot of things going on here, but as I expressed last time, I firmly believe that one of the causative factors is that it was a 35-year period between countywide assessments. And you can say all sorts of other things, but that, I just...
And manpower, resources.
Yeah. Okay. What are other jurisdictions doing in terms of systematic reevaluations? Why don't we put that on for a work session after this is done, like maybe in January or February, and have the Board of Tax Assessors come back and talk to us about what your recommendations are for countywide reassessments and what the plan is, and hopefully you all will have looked at what some other communities are doing. And so let's just put that, because those were my questions. So let's put those off because I agree with John. The most important thing you have to do right now is to tend to those appeals. Councilor Thomas.
A quick question. Mr. Lomax, what was the last two questions, 30 and 31?
Are they in green?
Uh-huh.
Those were questions that Mayor Thomason asked when Mr. Jackson Turner, I think was his name, finished his presentation. She turned around and kind of offered those.
Right. Thank you.
Okay. Councilor Davis.